Hey government, welcome to chapters 2 slideshow. It is I, Miss Corie again. Like I said before, if you've had me before as a teacher, like for world history or history through film, because those are the two other classes I've taught, you know that I like my videos. Yeah. These videos are not required for you to watch for this class, but they are definitely going to probably help you out when it comes to comprehension. Because if you're like me, if I read something on a slideshow or in a textbook or something, I forget about it like 5 seconds later. So that's why I make these videos, because like just having someone talk to you about it, it like makes you learn better. Question mark? Well, for some people that is, maybe not others. If you are looking for vocab words throughout this video, by the way, they're in red text. So I made them stand out even more for these videos. Yay. All right, so let's talk about the origins of the American government, which is fun because we talk about history, and you know I love history. So the roots of American democracy. So the English political heritage of representative government, limited government, and individual rights influenced the development of government in the US. So in other words, the US was super duper influenced by the English. From the start, the English colonies in North America experimented with forms of self-government, and the English colonists were influenced by ideas from various intellectual traditions, ranging from republicanism to natural rights theory, Judeo-Christian ideals, and the work of Enlightenment thinkers. I know there's a lot. I'll be going through this pretty fast, so if you do have any questions, please let me know because I speak really, really fast. So the roots of American democracy. The main idea for this is that American democracy was shaped by our English political heritage, colonial experiments in self-governments, and the range of intellectual influences. So the English political heritage. So colonial government would never be an exact copy of the British system. Colonial leaders adapted old ideas based on English traditions to a new environment. So we got a vocab word right here. Let's turn on my laser pointer. All right, so representative government. So that tradition began back in the 11th century, so that would be the 1000s. And it evolved into a bicameral or two-chamber legislature. Now, when it says bicameral, remember, break it down a little bit like in your science classes. So bi means two. We have bicameral even today with the Senate and with Congress. So nobles typically comprised of the upper house, and this is for English government, by the way, not the US government, like the United Kingdom's government, the British, those people. Okay. So nobles comprised of the upper house or the House of Lords, which is what it's called today. And then local representatives participated in the House of Commons, which is today still known as the House of Commons. So House of Commons is like the everyday people. House of Lords are like the nobly people. So again, this is English politics, not American politics. Okay. So limited government is also really important from England. So that began in 1215 when King John signed something called the Magna Carta. Which, if you were in world history with me, did we talk about the Magna Carta? I don't even remember. I might have skipped that, to be honest. Okay, it moved from rule of man to rule of law. So instead of like kings and stuff ruling, laws were the ones that made the decisions. And it outlined individual rights which king could not violate, and also included stuff like on taxes. All right. So English political heritage, I'm going to read through this real fast. So there was individual rights really formed during the English like time period of about 1600. So in 1628, King Charles was required to sign the Petition of Rights, which required monarchs to obtain parliamentary approval before levying new taxes, but also could not unlawfully imprison people or establish military rule during times of peace. It also extended conflict between Charles and Parliament, erupted into civil war in 1642. Charles was eventually defeated and beheaded. In 1685, this renewed conflicts and rebellions between the crown and the parliament. And then in 1689, William and Mary, so King William and Queen Mary, chose to rule, but had to be governed according to the statutes of the government or of parliament. And then in 1689, the English Bill of Rights passed, which included free speech and protection from cruel and unusual punishment, was guaranteed, which is what we have in the United States today. And also, it established a constitutional monarchy. All right. So how did limited government develop in England? Through the English Revolution, the English Bill of Rights, which was what the U.S. kind of used as a base for our Bill of Rights. So let's talk about the English colonies real quick. I'm sure you've learned about them a lot in U.S. history. So English colonists began to settle parts of North America in the early 1600s, bringing English political theories and methods of governance. So here's a bunch of examples of experiments in early governments. And then there's different types of English colonies, but you really don't need to know that. So we're just going to kind of skip you through. Okay, awesome. There's some other influences that, like the early Americas got influence from like other Western ideals, such as intellectual influences, which is in addition to English traditions. Ideas were key to transforming loyal English colonists first into revolutionaries and then into founders of a new nation. George Washington leading the troops, and probably a lot of the troops had English heritage. Yeah. Okay. And then there's republicanism, which is the idea of representative government going back to Greece and Rome. Highly values citizen participation, public good, and civic virtue. And influences include Aristotle, whatever that guy is, de Montesquieu, and others. And then also Judeo-Christian influences, which would be religious heritage common to both Christianity and Judaism, and law and individual rights of divine origin. There's also the Enlightenment thinkers. So Enlightenment was an intellectual movement in the 18th century Europe. So the framers of the U.S. Constitution believed in people's natural rights of life, liberty, and property. That was a huge Enlightenment ideal. Okay, let's just keep going. Let's see here. What intellectual influences shaped the farmers' view on republicanism? Greece and Rome. Okay, so next let's talk about the American independence a little bit more. So after the French and Indian War, the colonists rebelled against British attempts to assert control over the colonies and against new British taxes. In 1775, the Second Continental Congress called for the writing of a formal Declaration of Independence, which I'm sure you all remember from U.S. history. Yes. So American independence, the main idea of it was that the British imposed a new policy on the American colonies, sparked rebellion, and in time, the American Revolution. So the road to independence. So the road that led the American colonies to unite with one another and break with Great Britain was long and fraught with conflict. As you may remember from U.S. history, there was a lot of different kind of conflicts going up, such as the French-Indian War, and then leading to some other conflicts between like the natives and the colonists, and then the colonists and England. And I think I can just pretty much skip that. Okay, talks about a little bit with changes in British policies. The Stamp Act, that was a huge one that a lot of the American colonists rebelled against because it was a really large tax on paper goods. And then there's also other colonial protests, such as the Boston Tea Party, where they threw tea in the harbor. There's also the Intolerable Acts, which ended all forms of self-rule in Massachusetts. Yeah, the Boston Massacre, Boston Tea Party, the Intolerable Acts, those all big ones there. Okay. So what forms of protest did the colonists use to oppose British policies would be like boycotts, rallies, pamphlets, letter writing, campaigns, all of that stuff. All right, now we get into some vocab word time, so make sure you pay attention. So we're going to talk about the Continental Congress. So like I said in the first video, compromise is a huge thing in American politics, okay? So most colonists held out hope for compromise to roll back taxes. Virginia, Massachusetts, so remember they're one of the first 13 colonies. Their assemblies called for a meeting of colonies in Philadelphia, and this led to something called the First Continental Congress, which happened in 1774. So the First Continental Congress passed declaration and resolves demanding the repeal of the Intolerable Acts. In 1775, the British reject these demands. British troops clashed with colonial militia at Lexington and Concord, which is the first armed resistance of the colonists, which also kind of sparks like the first battle of the Revolutionary War. The Second Continental Congress happened in 1775, and that was organized by the Continental Army, and they named George Washington as their commander. This is where the Revolutionary War really begins, as colonists sought independence from Britain. Okay. All right. So then the Declaration of Independence. So, armed conflict continued for months before the independence officially declared. So, on June 7th, 1776, a resolution proposed to Second Continental Congress to officially declare independence from Great Britain. This resolution passes July 2nd. So you're like, wait a minute, that's not July 4th. We celebrate on July 4th. Now, just hold on 1 minute. So the committee approved to write formal statements justifying a resolution. Thomas Jefferson, this dude right here, he wrote most of the document, drawing on the Virginia Declaration of Rights adopted by the Virginia House of Bourgeoisie 1 month earlier. So Virginia Declaration declared all men are by nature equally free and independent and have certain inherited rights that cannot be denied. So pretty much Thomas Jefferson just kind of stole whatever Virginia was writing and made it into the Declaration of Independence. And he also echoed the philosophies of John Locke that people have the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Thomas Jefferson also echoed ideas of government as social contract based on consent of the people. So finally, on July 4th, 1776, Declaration of Independence was adopted, and Britain's 13 colonies ceased to exist as a new nation emerged. Dun dun dun, pretty cool. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about how the government was set up in the United States. So, the state constitution. So, by 1780, each of the 13 newly independent states had adopted its own written constitution. Each tested ideas about how to design a republican government that protected individual rights. So, two really big things would be self government and separation of power. So, self government is that all new states' constitutions establish republican governments with strong legislatures with elected representatives. Um, and then voting rights varied from state to state, and some states granted the right to vote to adult male taxpayers. Others had property qualifications, and only New Jersey allowed women to vote at first. Yeah. All right, and then the separation of powers would be like the three branches of government. So the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. States had the real power to govern themselves, and powers included conducting foreign affairs and declaring war. And most legislatures had two houses, and some elected governors and judges as well. So some of that stuff has changed into what the modern day is. Some of it has stayed, but some has changed, and I'm sure we'll talk about that in later slides. So also with the state constitution, so each state's constitutions also had limited government, so strong legislative bodies reflected general mistrust of the monarchy. So the colonists did not grant unlimited powers to the government. Annual elections, term limits, and separation of power were established as checks, meaning that no one can have too much power. That's what a check means. And it kept powers of governors deliberately weak, and it also limited their terms. There's also individual rights in state constitutions, such as protecting people's rights, seen as a way to protect from excess of government. So, for example, in 1780, Massachusetts Constitution included a Bill of Rights to protect individual liberties, and liberties included trial by jury, freedom of assembly, and speech. So, what ideas about the government did state constitutions experiment with? That would be like self-government, limiting the power of the executive branch, separation of powers, and individual rights. Now, remember, when I'm talking about these like state governments, at this time, there were only 13 states, okay? So we just have the main 13 colonies. All right, and then let's get into the Articles of Confederation. So in 1777, the Second Continental Congress then passed the first official plan for national government called the Articles of Confederation, which we'll wait till the next slide because I believe the next slide has more of a definition. So after the Revolutionary War, weakness in the Articles led to conflicts among the states, sparking calls for a stronger national government. So the state's first attempt to build a national government, the Articles of Confederation, proved too weak to last. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the Articles of Confederation a little bit deeper. So what were the Articles of Confederation? So in June of 1776, there was a new model of government crafted to build the firm League of Friendship among states, retaining sovereignty, freedom, and independence. So in other words, the national government did not want all the states to be rivals with each other. They wanted the states to be friends. In June of 1777, the Article of Confederation was adopted, but it had to be ratified before going into force. So let's talk about ratification because that comes up a lot in government, and it honestly never explains what ratification is in these slideshows. So ratification is a change to a law or legal document. So in the case of the U.S. Constitution, to change a part of the Constitution or to add to the Constitution, lawmakers must first propose an amendment. An amendment is a statement that lawmakers want to add to the Constitution. So 75% of the lawmakers, or 3 out of 4 lawmakers, have to agree to the amendment before it can be ratified into the U.S. Constitution. So we talked about before, right? Typically with laws, it's 50% plus 1. When it comes to amendments to the Constitution, it's 75% of the politicians, which is a lot. That's hard to get. So yeah, let's keep going. So with the powers of a national government, it was created weak national government, and they did not want to and did not provide for national court system. So that's one of the reasons why the Articles of Confederation failed, because there was no national court system. And we know today that we have one. It's called the Supreme Court. Also, it only had one house Congress, which meant that the power to act on matters of common interest, admit new states, settle disputes, making money, raising armies, and declaring war all fell onto Congress itself. And then state powers, states could retain all powers not specifically given to Congress. Powers included the ability to tax and enforce national laws, but states were also required to contribute funds to national governments as they saw fit. So here's kind of an infographic about the powers of Congress and also the limits of Congress. So how did national and state powers differ under the Articles? National powers were limited and specifically cited in the Articles of Confederation. State powers were all the other powers that were not specifically cited. I know, right? So there's a lot of weakness to the Articles in Confederation. Some of the big ones was Articles gave Congress key responsibilities but placed limits that kept it from effectively enforcing laws and policies. Didn't have a national executive branch. Articles denied Congress the power to tax, which, as you might know today, the national government does tax us. So it wasn't, the Articles of Confederation weren't great. They eventually failed, but what the framers of the Constitution did is they took parts of it that did work and then put it into the Constitution. That's pretty much what we have today. So what were the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation? It had no executive or judicial branch. The Confederation could not levy taxes, enforce its law, or regulate commerce between states. All states had to agree before the Articles could be changed. All right, let's hear. Where are we at? Ah, yes, that's right. We still have that one weird vocab word that just kind of sticks out of nowhere. All right, so let's start from here. So let's start with the Constitution, because you're going to do, I think, is it a reading or a video about the Constitution? I don't even remember. Okay, anyway, so the new Constitution. So how did the Constitution actually come about? So there was a convention meeting. The first one would be May 25th in 1787. So it's quite a few years after the Revolutionary War ended. Convention gets underway with representatives of 12 of the 13 states. Rhode Island didn't send anybody. Delegates worked to draft the framework for a new government, and meetings were held in strict secrecy without press or public. And the framers of the Constitution would be 55 delegates. Of course, they were all white property-owning men, known as the framers of the Constitution. 1/3 had served in the Continental Army, meaning that they served in the Revolutionary War. 8 had signed the Declaration of Independence back in 1776. George Washington was the president of the convention, and James Madison was also a big key figure. Okay, so you can see here some of the framers. You'll see a lot of really familiar names like Ben Franklin or Hamilton or Madison. Maybe not William Patterson or this dude or this dude. All right. So one of the things when it came to the Constitution was really this rivalry between the Virginia Plan and something called the New Jersey Plan. So let's talk through this real quick. So with the Virginia Plan, what the Virginian representatives wanted is that they wanted to create a new form of government, which emerged at the convention, and they called for a central government to be divided into 3 branches, which would be the legislative, executive, and judicial, each branch with its own power and checks for the others. And it also called for a strong national government with power to make laws, make taxes, control interstate commerce, and override state laws. And also called for bicameral legislature with membership based on states' populations. The lower house members elected directly by the people, upper house members selected by state legislatures. Ooh, interesting. And then the New Jersey Plan. Okay, so that was kind of the rival plan to the Virginia Plan. So the New Jersey Plan was where delegates from small states were concerned that the Virginia Plan gave too much power to large states. So if you look even at the state size, so Virginia is way bigger than New Jersey, and New Jersey was really worried about that. So the New Jersey Plan called for a strong central government made up of 3 branches, but was designed to stay closer to the Articles of Confederations. So this called for a unicameral legislature, having 1 legislative chamber. Okay, so uni, go back to like your science classes, right? Uni means 1, so that means there's only 1 legislative chamber. So each state would have 1 vote with equal representation regardless of its population, and despite support for small states, the plan was ultimately rejected at the convention. Okay, so here's kind of the Venn diagram I have for the Virginia Plan, the New Jersey Plan. So again, the Virginia Plan really favored by large states. They would have 2 houses of Congress and representation based on population, and also created a stronger national government. The New Jersey Plan would have favored by the small states, 1 house of Congress, and each state has equal representation, and similar to the Articles of Confederation. But they both agreed that the plans to change the Articles of Confederation, because it was just too weak, and Congress could regulate trade and collect taxes, and also there would be the 3 branches of government. Oh, so of course, the states fought over which plan was the best. So that's where there came a compromise. So that came to the Great Compromise, which happened on June 30th, 1787, where Roger Sherman, whoever that guy is, presented the Connecticut Compromise, also known as the Great Compromise, which included elements of both plans. So there's the bicameral legislature, which is where the lower house number was based on states' population, and the upper house had 2 members each. So today, we would know the lower house, right? That would be the House of Representatives, okay? Because it was based on states' population. And if you look at a population map today of how many like representatives each state has, I think Minnesota has 10, something like that, and like California has like 50 something. And then the upper house with 2 members each, we know that today as like the Senate. Okay. So like Senator Tina Smith and Senator Amy Klobuchar, they are part of this, what would be like the upper house. But today we just call it the Senate. Okay. There was also a compromise over slavery. So as you probably know from U.S. history, like slavery was a hot topic. It was legal in all 13 colonies. So there was a really big debate whether slaves could be counted as part of a state's population, and whether importation of enslaved people should be allowed to continue. So counting enslaved people would greatly increase population and power of the southern states, which of course the northern states did not like that. So they came up with the 3/5 compromise, where 3/5 of enslaved people would be counted to determine a state's population. And the compromise on the slave trade allowed it to continue protected for the next 20 years, which of course then we know leads to the Civil War and all that stuff. So that's the Great Compromise. Here's kind of a flow chart on it too, which is nice to look at. Let's see, where else are we at? Oh yeah. All right, let's wrap this up. So some things that were conflicting and the framers compromised on is that some wanted the president elected directly by the people, other wanted like state legislators or national legislators to elect the president, which would really turn into more of like a parliamentary system. But as you know today, the president is elected directly by its people. But the compromise to that would be having the electoral college, which is a whole nother thing, and I really don't want to get into that right now. And also with finalizing the Constitution, there was a lot of debated issues, but also all the disputes were settled, and they made key decisions during the summer of 1787. Ben Franklin said document was as close to perfect as possible, and to overlook parts they did not like, and act heartedly and unanimously in signing the Constitution, and some delegates refused to sign because it did not include a Bill of Rights. So only 39 delegates from 12 states signed the Constitution, and the convention was finally over in September. So what compromises made the Constitution possible? That included the 3/5 compromise, the Great Compromise, compromising over the Atlantic slave trade, and the election of the president. All right, we're going to stop right here, because the rest of it doesn't really have like any vocab words or anything. So we're just going to stop here. Okay, great. See you next video. Thanks for watching. Let me know if you have questions. Bye.